The theme of this year's conference couldn't be more relevant. We are in the midst of a global pandemic that has caused enormous stress on our societies. In addition to the socio-economic and humanitarian consequences of the pandemic, we see risks of exacerbating tension and new conflict, with threatened security and well-being in many regions.
If we're thinking about the traditional issues of hard security, of arms control, of nuclear non-proliferation, of regulation of the arms trade, can you do that without cooperation? Of course not. It's absolutely fundamental. If we're thinking about the newer agenda of climate change, can you respond to the challenges of climate change, the loss of biodiversity, the crisis of air pollution without international cooperation? Again, that would be a non-starter. And the pandemic this year has again shown us both the need for and deficiencies of international cooperation.
We live in a world now with enormous amounts of mistrust. And with this mistrust, this means that you have a huge resistance. You have to break down that mistrust almost as the beginning step to get things done. But I think in the end, you need to have a multilateral international umbrella.
In the last few years, as we've engaged in discussions around normative developments on the laws of war, that there's been a strong rise in a state focus. I think state and sovereign systems have been quite strong recently, and it's been a lot harder than perhaps a decade ago to create new infrastructure.
The digital revolution is changing the very nature of how we live, work. It's changing the very way states interact. It's changing the way societies work with states. It means we have to think much harder, not only about territorial-based security, but what I would call flow security. The connections that tie our societies together are susceptible to disruption.
We do find ourselves at the critical juncture when we talk about nuclear arms control and disarmament. We are witnessing a dangerous global situation. We see the development of new nuclear capabilities. In parallel, we also see the abandonment or the endangering of treaties that have regulated weapons of mass destruction for decades.
Going forward, you can see that the growth of unilateralism brings greater unpredictability, greater instability to international relations and security in particular. We have seen and probably will see increased and more overt competition among key actors.
We really need to see more and constructive multilateral, bilateral, and other cooperation to counter this.
Investments in institutions that diminish harm are crucial. This means upholding and implementing all of the disarmament treaties that we have. It means not developing new technologies of violence like autonomous weapon systems. It means instead of investing in weapons in war, we invest in the things that prevent conflict.
Actually, AI is a dual technology. And this has to be acknowledged because what we do in the civilian framework has impact on the military framework, in my opinion. So it's really a multifaceted approach that is needed.
That means we need to help to ensure that not only are tech practitioners more aware of arms control and peace and security implications of their work, but that we have to make sure that we as disarmament practitioners become much more aware of processes of development within industry or within development at all, so whether that's academia or other civil society.
So it is critical to very clearly define what we're worried about when developing security and arms control regimes. It means we need to be concerned with the functional goals and the design principles prevailing in the development of algorithms, not just the resulting artifacts, so not just the algorithmic program. And we must also look for ways to improve our arms control and non-proliferation doctrine, for example, by reassessing core concepts like dual use.
The pandemic is exacerbating humanitarian needs, both at an individual level, but it's also putting pressure on systems that were previously fragile anyway, and particularly for those that are involved in or are victims of armed conflict.
I'd like to see much greater respect for local communities, drawing in local communities, and then drawing in the wider community, in particular the business community.
So partnering with governments to strengthen social protection systems in order to be able to reach more vulnerable people with that assistance that they urgently needed, but also working with nations to
try to strengthen and sustain food systems.
Climate change is the existential threat and the most immediate threat, and the one that calls for urgent action. Cyber issues are also urgent and fantastically complicated, and those can only be dealt with international cooperation.
The UN at 75 celebration is an opportunity to recognize the organization's indispensable role for maintaining international peace and security. We should use this opportunity to adapt and listen to constructive voices, particularly our youth, on what multilateralism needs to deliver.
I think we have to think very much going forward about how we embed an understanding of what's coming and a resilience to what's coming.
This will not be, by a long shot, the last pandemic we face, and building the international infrastructure to deal with the next one is, comparatively to the other issues, easy.
I think that we've been left with an interesting range of issues to think about cooperating on, ranging from biosecurity through cyberspace and internet to US-China trade, and of course climate change and resource management. And we've been left with an interesting sense of where and how to do the cooperating.